The courtroom was calm, till one audio recording shook the entire hip-hop world. Young Thug was seated at the table, but the moment he heard those words come out of Gunna's mouth, everything changed. Witnesses say Thug's eyes went wide. His hands gripped the table like he was holding back a storm, and seconds later, the courtroom turned into a battlefield. The accusation that Gunna had cut a deal to save himself, even if it meant turning on his own brother. Fans watching the live stream lost their minds.
Yeah, your spot out right now. Go put it on Instagram. I bet you put it on Instagram. Yeah, your house out. On God. You block from your page. Yeah, I'm on your my fake page. Ain't about to black me. I still see it. That ain't me on that picture. I ain't green. The whole world been thinking that too, man. I'm pretty serious. I'm gonna say something like that. Man, that ain't me with that skirt on it with that hand.
The chat exploding with fire emojis and betrayal comments. Some swore Thug was on the verge of tears. Others said it was pure, boiling rage. But one thing was certain. A crack had ripped through the Wild Empire, and after today, nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom was already buzzing that morning. Whispers bouncing off the walls like tiny echoes of a storm waiting to break. Young Thug sat there, slouched slightly in his chair, his face blank but his leg bouncing under the table. It was one of those subtle tells that anyone close to him would recognize he wasn't relaxed. He was coiled tight, ready to spring. Gunna hadn't arrived yet, but his name was already hanging in the air like thick smoke. The lawyers were shuffling papers, the judge was still in chambers, and a few reporters leaned in closer to their recorders, sensing that today might be different. And then, like a scene straight out of a TV drama,
Hey man, what you gonna tell you? You feel me? You did. Hey man, ain't no campaign. You feel what I'm saying? It's time. You feel what I'm saying? Yeah, that way. And go tell that.
Gunna walked in. His eyes didn't search the room. They didn't glance at the jury. They went straight to Young Thug. The look was unreadable, but it wasn't friendly. Fans who later replayed the footage swore they saw a faint smirk on Gunna's face. The kind that hides something. The first few minutes were calm enough, just the usual motions and legal back and forth. But everyone in that room felt the undercurrent. A tension so thick it made you want to lean forward, just to catch the first spark. Then the prosecutor stood and dropped a bombshell that made even the defense table freeze. According to newly obtained evidence, Gunna had made a move behind closed doors, a private statement given in exchange for a personal concession in his own legal battle. No one said the word out loud, but the implication was there. Heavy and undeniable. Betrayal. Young Thug's reaction was immediate. He sat up straight, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned pale. His lawyer leaned over, whispering something in his ear, but Thug's eyes were locked on Gunna. Not blinking, not moving. The silence in the room stretched long enough that even the judge looked uneasy. Then, out of nowhere, Thug's voice cut through the quiet. "So, this is how you do me." The words weren't shouted, but they carried. Every reporter in the room scribbled them down in big, hurried letters. Gunna didn't answer, not at first. Cassius shifted in his seat, looking away, like a kid caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. And that's when it started. Thug leaned forward, still staring, and said, "I put food on your table. I put a roof over your head. I called you my brother. And you? You couldn't even look me in the eye when you did it." It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the murmurs that had started to rise. The bailiff took a step closer, just in case, but nobody moved to stop him yet. The judge banged the gavel, warning both sides to stay quiet, but it was too late. The emotions were spilling over. Somewhere in the gallery, a woman rumored to be a cousin of Thug was shaking her head, her hands covering her mouth. Another man in the back muttered something under his breath, and the reporter Next to him raised her eyebrows, sensing another quote she could use. The entire scene had that strange energy where you can't tell if you're witnessing history or just a disaster unfolding in real time. Gunn finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I did what I had to do," he said, looking toward the floor. "You don't know what they had on me." That set Thug off. "What they had on you? We were in this together. We were supposed to ride it out no matter what. You think cutting a deal makes you safe? It just makes you weak." His words echoed, and for a second it felt like the walls of the courtroom were closing in. Fans online who later saw the leaked clip went wild, debating every expression, every pause. Some said Thug's face was pure heartbreak. Others swore. They saw nothing but fury. Either way, the damage was visible. The bond between them, whatever was left of it, was fracturing in front of everyone. The judge called for a brief recess, hoping to cool the temperature in the room, but neither of them moved. Thug kept his eyes locked on Gunna, and Gunna kept glancing away, like he couldn't stand the weight of that stare. When the bailiff finally stepped in to guide them out, the tension didn't break. If anything, it followed them into the hallway, where more witnesses and more cameras were waiting. Outside the courtroom doors, the whispers turned into full conversations. People speculated about what move the prosecutor was talking about. Some believed it was a signed statement. Others said it was testimony planned for the future. No one knew for sure, but everyone knew it had to be big for Thug to react like that. In the hallway, a reporter managed to shout a question to Gunna. "Did you sell him out?" But Gunna just kept walking, surrounded by his lawyers, his jaw tight back inside. Thug's lawyer was pacing. He knew this moment would be replayed 1,000 times online, dissected by fans and critics alike. And for a man already fighting for his freedom, losing control in court was dangerous. But it was more than just the case. It was personal. To personal. When they were called back in, the room seemed quieter, heavier. The judge warned everyone that any more outbursts would have consequences, but you could tell that warning wasn't going to hold much weight. Because as soon as the next witness took the stand, the story got even more complicated. The witness, a man in a gray suit with nervous hands, claimed to have overheard a conversation between Gunna and one of the prosecutors weeks earlier. His voice trembled as he said it, but every word felt like another crack in the already crumbling relationship. He claimed Gunna had offered information in exchange for leniency, and while he didn't know what that information was, he said Gunna's tone made it clear it was about Thug at that moment. Thug let out a bitter laugh, the kind of laugh that isn't about humor at all. The judge shot him a look, but didn't say anything this time. Gunna's lawyers immediately objected, trying to paint the witness as unreliable, but the damage was done. Every person in that room, from the jury to the journalists, could feel the shift. And that's when the real storm began to brew, the one nobody was prepared for. The bitter laugh from Thug still hung in the air when the judge signaled for the proceedings to continue. Every eye in the courtroom bounced between the two men like they were waiting for the next spark to fly. Gunna shifted in his seat again, leaning forward to whisper to his lawyer, but his gaze stayed fixed on the papers in front of him. It was as if looking at Thug now would only pour gasoline on the fire. The witness on the stand swallowed hard, glancing toward the jury and then back at the prosecutor, as if silently asking whether he should keep going. The prosecutor gave a small nod, and the witness continued. He said the meeting had happened late at night in a side office of the courthouse. He claimed Gunna had been pacing, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, his voice low but intense. "I just need to make sure I'm not doing time for something I didn't even pull the trigger on." The witness quoted him as saying. The prosecutor in that meeting had supposedly leaned back in his chair and asked, "Are you willing to help us with your friend?" That was the moment, the witness said, that Gunna hesitated. Not long enough to kill the deal, but long enough to make it clear that the word friend still meant something to him. Even if just for a heartbeat, the jury leaned in a little closer now, sensing this was no ordinary testimony. Fans in the gallery exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others biting their lips like they didn't want to believe what they were hearing. Thug sat still, his jaw tight, his hands folded, but his eyes told another story. They were fixed on Gunna with the kind of focus that looked like it could burn holes through him. Gunna's lawyer stood up quickly, cutting the tension with a sharp objection. He accused the witness of fabricating the entire conversation to save his own skin. "This is nothing but hearsay," he said, his voice rising slightly. "And my client has denied from day one that he's given any information against anyone. In while?" But even as he spoke, some people noticed Gunna's foot tapping rapidly under the table. A small but telling sign that maybe the pressure was getting to him. When the judge overruled the objection, the witness went on, adding a new detail that made the entire room sit up. He claimed that after the meeting, he had overheard Gunna on the phone, telling someone he's not gonna like this, but it's the only way. The way the witness said it, slow and deliberate, made the words feel heavier, like they carried more than just legal weight. Thug's single quotes as cousin, still seated in the back, let out a quiet gasp. A woman next to her whispered, "Oh my God," and clutched her phone tighter, probably already texting someone about what she'd just heard. The tension in the room thickened until it was hard to breathe. And then came the twist no one saw coming. A second witness, who had been waiting in the hallway, was suddenly called in by the prosecution. This man, tall and broad-shouldered with a cold stare, claimed he had been present during a private studio session months before the arrests. In that session, he said, Thug and Gunna had an argument about loyalty. The way he told it, Thug had been frustrated about rumors swirling in the streets that someone in Weil was talking to the police. "It better not be you," Thug had supposedly told Gunna, pointing a finger in his face. Gunna, according to this witness, had laughed and said, "You know me better than that." The irony was almost too much for some in the gallery to handle. A few people shook their heads as if they were watching a slow-motion replay of a betrayal they couldn't stop. The jurors exchanged glances, but none dared speak. The judge reminded everyone to keep quiet, though his voice sounded a little strained now, as if he too was feeling the weight of what was unfolding. As the testimony dragged on, Thug's composure started to slip. His shoulders tensed, his breathing quickened, and his eyes kept darting toward the jury, almost as if to silently plead his case without saying a word. Gunna, on the other hand, looked more and more withdrawn, retreating into himself like a man building walls no one could climb. During a brief recess, the hallway outside turned into a feeding frenzy. Reporters huddled in tight circles, exchanging notes and speculating about what would come next. Fans outside the courthouse shouted, both their support and their anger. Some holding up handmade signs that read "Free Thug," while others yelled, "Gunna did what he had to." The divide was sharp, and it was growing by the hour. When court resumed, the defense tried to regain control, calling a character witness for Gunna. This man, a former producer who had worked with him for years, described Gunna as loyal, hardworking, and incapable of turning on his friends. But the prosecution was ready. In cross-examination, they asked if the producer had spoken to Gunna since his arrest. When he admitted he hadn't, the prosecutor simply raised an eyebrow and said, "So you really don't know what he's capable of under pressure, do you?" The producer faltered, glancing toward Gunna, but didn't answer. The whole thing felt like a slow grind toward something inevitable. The more details came out, the more it seemed like the fragile bond between these two men was shattering beyond repair. Every word, every look, every pause carried the weight of years of shared history and the pain of watching it collapse in real time. Then, Just as the day's testimony seemed to be winding down, the prosecution dropped another bomb. Announced they had obtained a recording, one they planned to play the next morning, that allegedly captured Gunna speaking directly about Thug in a way that could be interpreted as incriminating. The defense immediately objected, asking for time to review it, but the judge allowed it to be entered into evidence for the next session. The moment the judge set the time for the playback, you could feel the collective intake of breath in the room. Thug leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing to slits, while Gunna stared at the table like it might somehow swallow him whole. Everyone knew that whatever was on that recording could either blow the case wide open or destroy whatever was left of their friendship forever as the gavel came down to end the day. The energy in the room didn't fade, it intensified. People were already imagining what they might hear tomorrow. And somewhere in the corner of the gallery, a man in a black hoodie pulled out his phone and sent a text. "You're not gonna believe what's coming." And that was the exact moment. The whole thing took a turn nobody could have predicted. The next morning, the courthouse was already overflowing long before the hearing began. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder on the courthouse steps, shouting questions at anyone connected to the case, hoping for a quote that would go viral before lunch. Fans crowded behind barricades, holding up phones, live streaming every second, waiting for the doors to open. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew today was the day the prosecution would play the recording they'd teased yesterday. And no one could stop wondering what might be on it. Young Thug arrived first, dressed in a plain shirt and slacks, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, scanning the room like he was memorizing every face. Gunna came in moments later, flanked by his lawyers. He didn't look at Thug this time, not even once, but the tension between them was so strong you could feel it ripple through the rows of spectators. Whispers ran through the gallery like a current. This was the showdown they'd been waiting for. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The prosecutor wasted no time, standing with a small flash drive in his hand. "Your Honor, this is the recording obtained from a monitored phone line at the correctional facility," he said, his tone steady but carrying an edge of drama. The voice on the line is that of the defendant known as Gunna. He plugged the drive into the courtroom system, and the speakers crackled to life. The first sound was static, then a faint clinking in the background, the unmistakable echo of a prison phone call. A man's voice came through, calm but with an undercurrent of frustration. It was Gunna. "Look, I ain't trying to do no 30 years for something that ain't mine," he said. There was a pause, and then another voice, low and urgent. "Ask, you talking about Thug?" The pause after that question was longer. Long enough that everyone in the room leaned forward without realizing it. And then Gunna's voice came again, softer this time. "I gotta look out for me, man." Gasps erupted in the gallery. Thug's cousin clutched her chest like she'd just been stabbed. One man in the back muttered, "That's it, he's done." The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. But the reaction had already spread like wildfire. The recording continued. The other voice pressed him, asking if he was going to give them something. Gunna hesitated again, then said, "If it keeps me from rotting in here, yeah?" Those words hit the room like a punch. Thug didn't move, didn't speak. But his jaw was tight enough that the muscle in his cheek twitched with every heartbeat when the audio ended. The prosecutor looked toward the jury and simply said, "You've heard it yourself." He didn't need to add anything. The implication was clear. Gunna's lawyer jumped up, arguing that the clip was taken out of context, that it didn't prove he had given any actual information. "It's a man venting in a desperate situation," he insisted. But the jury's faces were unreadable, their eyes darting between the two men at the defense table. During the recess, the hallway exploded with chatter. Fans on social media were already dissecting every word of the audio, arguing about whether it was proof of betrayal or just a survival instinct. Outside, the divide between the Free Thug crowd and the Gunna Did Nothing Wrong supporters grew louder, each side chanting over the other. When court resumed, Thug's lawyer surprised everyone by calling a witness no one expected, a former member of YSL who had distanced himself from the crew years earlier. This man, lean and sharp-eyed, claimed he knew both Thug and Gunna personally. He painted a picture of their early days together, how they'd come up from nothing, sharing food, rides, and dreams. They were brothers, he said, his voice trembling. And in our world, brothers don't turn on each other, no matter what? The prosecutor countered quickly, suggesting the witness had his own grudges against Gunna. But the man shook his head. I ain't got no reason to lie. Just telling you, if what I heard on that tape is what it sounds like, then something's broken that can't be fixed. Thug's eyes softened for a brief second, almost like the words hit something deep inside. But then the mask came back, the unreadable stare returning as he glanced toward Gunna. Gunna, for his part, kept his eyes down, his hands clasped tightly on the table. The tension only escalated when the prosecution announced they had another piece of evidence. A series of text messages, allegedly between Gunna and an unnamed associate, that hinted at cooperation. They didn't show them yet, saying they would introduce them tomorrow. But the mere mention was enough to set the gallery buzzing again. The judge called for an early adjournment, citing heightened emotions in the room. As the gavel fell, Thug stood slowly, never breaking eye contact with Gunna. He didn't say a word, but the stare lasted until Gunna was escorted out by his lawyers. It was the kind of look that said more than any outburst ever could. Outside, the crowds were even more frenzied than before. Reporters shouted over each other, fans screamed accusations and defenses, and the sound of police radios crackled in the background as officers tried to keep the peace. Somewhere in that chaos, a fan live streaming on their phone said into the camera, "This ain't over. Tomorrow's gonna be worse." And they didn't know how right they were, because what was waiting in the shadows for the next day would twist the story in a way nobody, not even the most diehard fans, could have seen coming. The following day felt different, heavier, like the air itself was weighed down by everything that had already been said. By the time the doors to the courtroom opened, there was a line stretching around the block. Inside, the crowd was even larger, the faces even more eager. Everyone wanted to know about those text messages the prosecution hinted at yesterday. Young Thug walked in first, the same calm but calculating presence, his eyes scanning the gallery before settling forward. Gunna entered a few minutes later, his head slightly bowed, not looking toward anyone. The space between them at the defense table felt like a canyon. The prosecutor stood with a folder in hand, his tone slow and deliberate. "What you're about to see," he said to the jury, "are messages obtained from a phone seized during the investigation." The sender, identified as Gunna, communicated with an unnamed associate regarding the ongoing case. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up with a projection of the first message. "They're offering me a way out." The text read, "I just need to give them something." A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. The next message popped up. "Don't tell him yet. He'll lose it." This one landed like a blow. Everyone knew him meant Thug. Thug's jaw tightened, but he stayed still, his eyes locked on the screen. The messages continued, each one making the air in the room feel thicker. "I can't do years for something I didn't touch," one said. Another read, "It's not like I'm lying. They already got half the story. I'm just filling in blanks." By the time the last message was shown, the gallery was buzzing like a hive. The judge had to bang the gavel twice to bring order. Gunna's lawyer jumped up, arguing that the messages were taken out of context, that they didn't prove cooperation but only reflected a man under extreme stress. The prosecutor countered, "Stress doesn't create betrayal, it reveals it." Finally broke his silence, leaning toward his lawyer but speaking loud enough for the mic to catch it. "So this is how brothers act now." The words echoed through the room, and for a moment, even the judge didn't say anything. The defense called for a break. And when the recess was granted, the hallway outside erupted. Fans from both sides clashed verbally, some shouting that Gunna was a traitor, others yelling he was just trying to survive. News crews caught every second, broadcasting it live to an audience that was growing by the minute. On social media, the hashtag #ThugVsGunna was trending worldwide when they reconvened. The prosecution brought in one final witness, a man who claimed to have been with both Thug and Gunna during their rise to fame. His testimony was raw, almost painful. He spoke about the nights they spent in cramped apartments, the shared meals, the plans for the future. "We said we'd take the heat together if it ever came," he said, voice cracking. Ride or die wasn't just a phrase, it was a promise. Then he turned to look at Gunna directly. "And you broke it." The room went still. Gunna didn't respond, didn't even look up. Thug stared straight ahead, his expression a mask of steel. The judge eventually called the day to a close, saying, the jury would have time to process the evidence before the next hearing. As they stood to leave, Thug finally turned his head toward Gunna. The two locked eyes for the first time in days. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst, just a long, cold stare that seemed to carry years of history and 1,000 unspoken words. Gunna blinked first, looking away as the bailiffs moved them toward separate exits. Outside, the scene was pure chaos. Fans were screaming. Reporters were shoving microphones toward anyone with a connection to the case, and police were working hard to keep the crowd from boiling over. In the middle of it all, a familiar figure in a hoodie slipped into a black SUV, phone pressed to his ear. Those close enough heard him say, "It's done now, it's just a matter of time." What he meant by that, no one knew for sure. But it was enough to set off another wave of rumors online. Some said it meant Gunna had sealed his fate. Others believed it meant Thug had already decided his next move. And as the sun dipped behind the courthouse, casting long shadows over the chaos below, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't the end of the story, was only the beginning of a feud that would spill far beyond the courtroom walls, into music, into the streets, and into the history books of hip-hop itself. The lines had been drawn, the trust was gone, and the fans, they were left wondering who would make the next move and how deep the cuts would go when it happened. And so, here we are. A brotherhood that once stood unshakable, now hanging by a thread that looks ready to snap at any moment. The courtroom has become a battlefield. Every piece of evidence, another bullet. Every stare, another unspoken threat. Fans are divided. Friends are choosing sides, and the internet is on fire with theories, arguments, and predictions about what comes next. Some believe Gunna was just protecting himself. Others swear he's crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. And young Thug, he hasn't said much, but the way he's looked at Gunna these past few days speaks volumes more than words ever could. The story isn't over. In fact, it's only getting more intense. There are still witnesses left to hear, evidence left to reveal, and secrets waiting in the shadows that could turn everything upside down again. What will happen when the jury finally hears it all? Will there be a last-minute twist that flips the narrative? Or are we witnessing the slow, painful death of one of hip-hop's most legendary alliances? Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think was Gunna's move? Betrayal or just survival? Is young Thug justified in his rage, or is there more to this story than meets the eye? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I'll be reading every single one. If you're as hooked on this drama as we are, hit that like button to show your support. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking update in this unfolding saga. Trust me, what's coming next, you do not want to miss. Stay locked in, because the next chapter could change everything. Everything.